I want to be in the middle of the action, to be a part of life. When I came into the world in 1997, doctors started out by checking if I had hip problems. When you examine a baby for hip problems, you take the leg and make a special circular movement. And the doctors couldn't understand what this little cracking noise was. What they didn't know was that the cracking they heard was the sound of my thigh bones breaking. I didn't have hip problems. I had a severe type of Osteogenesis Imperfecta, also called brittle bone disease. For me, in my lifetime, I have had 500 broken bones and a body filled with enough rods and metal to set off a metal detector. You can imagine the huge shock for my parents, who thought that they had had a perfect, healthy child like my big sister. My future was very uncertain. No one knew if I would survive my first years of life, and if I did, what would my future look like? Would I be able to walk? Would I be able to sit up? No one could tell anything about the future prospects of me. And by my first birthday, I had broken my first 50 bones. I was so fragile that my parents could easily end up breaking a bone on me. Just the smallest wrong movement when they put on my sock could cause a broken foot. Luckily, my bones have only become stronger since then, and they don't break as easily today. Now I have a few broken bones per year. Growing up wasn't easy, but I had always been very stubborn. In kindergarten, I used to hate taking naps. So when my kindergarten teacher had to put me down for a nap, I would take my arms and place them behind my back. Then they couldn't lay me down without breaking my arms. But my parents told the kindergarten teacher, just put her down anyway. And then we hope that she won't break an arm. My parents didn't want me to learn that I could control the world with my disability. Besides, they thought that if I was smart enough to put my arms behind my back, I'd probably also be smart enough to move them before they broke. My parents could easily have wrapped me up in cotton wool because I was so fragile. But it has always been important that I was able to have my own experiences and learn from them. They let me take risks even though they knew it could end up with a broken bone. And this attitude is essential to my life. It is more important to live a life full of adventure and joy than it is to live a life with no broken bones. It is so essential to go out and get wonderful experiences that could bring us so much joy despite the risks there may be. But it hasn't always been so easy. I would like to tell you a little story from my life. It was a normal Friday night. I didn't have my seatbelt on, and I can tell you I have remembered my seatbelt ever since. I was driving my wheelchair, just as I always do, and I drove my left front wheel into a door frame. It wasn't at a high speed, but it was enough to make the wheelchair stop with a bump. I flew out and landed on the floor. My parents were sitting on the couch watching television. They rushed up and ran out to me. I remember that the first thing I told them was that I could breathe. I had fallen out of a bed before where I gasped for breath. But luckily, I had no trouble breathing this time. As I lay on the floor, I had no idea how serious it was. I was in a lot of pain, and I was well aware of the fact that I had broken some bones. What I remember most was my nosebleed. Blood squirted out like a fountain. And I thought it was weird because I didn't land on my nose. My parents called an ambulance. The medics came quickly, and my dad went with me in the ambulance. My mom stayed and cleaned up the blood from the walls and floors. When I arrived at the hospital, I started to lose consciousness and my speech was slurring. I couldn't remember anything. I was sent to the trauma room right away for a scan, and it revealed the damage the fall from a wheelchair had caused. I had 2 broken legs, 2 broken arms, a fracture in my pelvis, broken ribs, a punctured lung, a broken neck, and a skull fracture. And it turned out that the nosebleed I had at home was caused by a big brain bleed. My condition was critical, and I was sent straight to surgery. When the surgeons opened up my skull, they said it was like trying to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle. Many people think it's a pimple I have here in my forehead, but I can tell you it's just a screw. Because the surgeons did everything they could to fix my skull and stop my brain from bleeding. After the surgery, I was in a coma for 6 days. 6 days where they didn't know if I would even survive at all. And if I did, there was a huge risk that I wake up complete brain damaged. But I woke up. I woke up to the worst moment of my life. I felt something in my throat. It was this large tube that's helped me breathe for 6 days. This tube made me feel so claustrophobic. I'd been away for 6 days. I was in total pain and had a big tube in my throat. I just pointed at the tube for the nurses to get it out as quick as possible. And luckily, it did. I saw myself in a mirror. Definitely not a pretty sight. I was blue and yellow. My face was swollen. I had a neck collar on. My hair was shaved off from one ear to the other. There were screws sticking out of my head. It was going to take time to regain my appearance. But the most important thing was that I survived and that my brain was functioning as it should. It took me quite a long time to recover after this accident. I was stuck in the bed because of all of my broken bones. When I experience things that are difficult and painful, I remind myself that it is only temporary. My bones will heal and the pain will go away. It was hard for me, but I believe it was even harder for my family. They had the worry of 6 days in a coma. 6 days where they didn't know if I would ever wake up again. And if I did, would I be complete brain damage? Because then none of us would have wanted me to wake up again. I slept the first 6 days away where it was most critical, where they had 6 days of uncertainty. But luckily, we all made it through. My hair grew out, my bones healed, and I went back to school the day the final exam started, so I could finish high school and move on to the next step in my life. This fall really made it clear to me how fragile life is. It made me aware of how quickly things can change. But does this mean that I should be more careful? No. It means that I should put on my seatbelt. And it means that it's so important I take some risks in life in pursuit of a good experience. It means I live my life to the fullest, even though it can have a price, because a life lived to the fullest is much greater than a life lived in fear. When my group of friends started partying, of course, I had to be a part of that too. Like anyone, I think I can go out and drink a bit of alcohol, and my dad totally disagrees. And I really struggle arguing with him. The problem is simple. Don't drink and drive. Don't drink and drive a wheelchair. To drive a wheelchair, you need control. The more you drink, the less control you have. My father's biggest fear is that I hit another bump, fall out of my wheelchair, and won't survive. I'm well aware of the risks, but I just get so much joy from the parties. So I choose to do it anyway. We all have those stories of a party that goes wrong, and I would like to tell you mine. One night, I was really looking forward to a party with my friends, and I was out on the dance floor having a great time. And I danced. I danced so much that I broke my leg. I went to the kitchen where my mom was and said, "Mom, I think I just broke my leg." And my mom said, "Do you want to have some painkillers or do you want to keep partying?" And I decided to party on. Before I went back to the dance floor, my mom put on a little bandage on my knee. And now I had one leg less to dance with. So I just fist bumped some more. And I fist bumped so much that I broke my arm. I went to the kitchen to my mom, said, "Mom, I think I just broke my arm." And my mom said, "Do you want to have some painkillers or do you want to keep partying?" And I chose to go back to the dance floor. I thought it was too early to stop. So I'm dancing and dancing, and suddenly, crack. This time, it was from my neck. I went to the kitchen. "Mom, something just went crack in my neck." And my mom said, "Could we please go home now?" But I decided to go back to the dance floor. But when I went back to the dance floor, I quickly felt the pain from the places it had cracked during the night, and I finally realized that it was time to go home. I know this may seem extreme, and luckily I hadn't broken my neck. It was only my arm and my leg. But it takes so much for me to say stop and not to be a part of it any longer. And in my case, I believe it's good that I'm not sitting home in fear of breaking a bone, because then my life could easily become boring. I want to be in the middle of the action, to be a part of life, to take that chance, because I know that this is how I live the happiest life. So my message for you is to remember that no matter what your fear is, life is not an either or, it can be both and. You can be in pain and still feel joy. You can be weak and still be strong. You can be afraid and still be brave. A life lived to the fullest is much greater than a life lived in fear. Thank you.